It should be voluntary, and it should be acting only to protect lives, rights, and property. And anytime it goes outside of that, for even the best of intentions, often it's not for the best of intentions, but even if it's for the best of intentions, by its very nature, a centrally planned monopoly that claims through violence and threats of violence sole jurisdiction over something is not a good organization to be providing a service. If you have one of two options in getting a service, you can get it from competing providers who have a vested interest in providing you the best value because they don't want to lose you to their competitor, or you can get it through someone who goes, this is what I'm going to give you, take it or leave it. Government is a monopoly who says take it or leave it, except they don't give you the option to leave it. You just have to take it.
Today I'm here with Spike Cohen, former vice presidential candidate, Libertarian Party. So firstly, Spike, what would you, we're chatting with a libertarian is probably what I'm going to title this video. How would you describe your politics? Obviously there's a party platform, but what do you stand for?
In a nutshell, I believe that people do best when they're most free. If I had to sum it up into a sentence, it would be that we should be as free as possible and that we do the best when we are most free. And that stems from my belief that we own ourselves. And if we own ourselves, that means that we own our bodies, that means we own our labor, that means we own our words, that means we own our thoughts, and it means that we own the product of our labor, which is our property. And that if anyone tries to take from you or your property or hurt you or hurt your body or take from your life, they're aggressing against you. And I and we as libertarians believe that that's bad, not just from a moral standpoint, that you shouldn't hurt people, you shouldn't try to take from them, you shouldn't try to rob them, but it also doesn't work. If I can take from you and anyone else who's watching or listening to this whenever I want to, I don't have to be a good steward of what I have. I don't have to make good decisions with what I have. I can just take more whenever I want to. And if we look at the bad outcomes that we're facing right now, it really boils down to a series of situations in which very powerful people have presumed the authority to take from us and tell us what to do and order us around whenever they see fit. And that's what leads to the bad outcomes that we're facing. So libertarians believe that these outcomes will be better when people are more free, when they aren't having arbitrary decisions imposed upon them by powerful people and are instead able to choose for themselves and in cooperation with others.
Sure. Give me an example of that then, and how that would translate to policy.
Perfect example is this pandemic that we're facing right now.
Okay.
COVID-19. First of all, the reason that COVID-19 spread in the first place is in China, their government did everything they could to bury the fact that there was a new virulent pathogen that was spreading around the country. One of the original doctors, I forget his name right now, but one of the first doctor to actually diagnose that there was a new version of SARS that was spreading, he was arrested. He and other doctors that were trying to share that were arrested for spreading false propaganda. That's what allowed it to spread out of control in the first place. Then it gets here, and what happens? The CDC and the FDA don't allow healthcare workers to test for COVID-19 for the first nearly 2 months that the virus was here. That allowed it to spread out of control. We had American companies that were making approved functioning COVID-19 test kits, and they were having to sell them overseas because they weren't allowed to do it here. So because of an arbitrarily defined policy that was made by powerful people years ago, healthcare workers weren't allowed to do their jobs. And I mean, we could delve into all the other ways that that healthcare policy is factored by bad decision making. But just on this one thing, if they'd been allowed to test and contain the people that had COVID-19, it wouldn't be spread out of control as bad as it is right now. And then that has turned into these arbitrary lockdowns that have done far more harm than good and have done little to nothing to actually slow the spread. And that they actually use the fact that the lockdowns aren't working to justify keeping the lockdowns going, even though the World Health Organization is saying that long-term lockdowns are a bad idea and that they don't recommend them. These are all examples of what happens when you have powerful people who are removed from the consequences of their decisions and are imposing them on the rest of us. If they had simply allowed healthcare workers to do their jobs and save people's lives and test and treat people, we'd still have the virus, but it wouldn't be nearly as widespread as it is right now, and it might have potentially been contained.
Sure. I mean, let's talk about that healthcare for a little bit, because that, I think, is perhaps one of your more controversial policies, I suppose.
It's the hardest one to sell. Yeah.
Right. Because I think it's become almost a standard by a lot of people that healthcare is supposed to be what's the word I'm looking for?
A human
Just,
right. It should
right,
be free
like,
and yeah,
just
yeah.
free and just kind of
Yep.
provided. So I guess what problems do you see with that?
We have to look at why healthcare is so expensive to begin with. Recent studies have shown that 3/4 of the cost of healthcare are just the cost of complying with the bureaucracy that is built into Medicare, Medicaid, and government mandated insurance. And to be clear, I'm not talking about the cost of providing those services. I'm talking about the cost of proving compliance with all of the regulations and mandates and taxes and fees and bureaucracy and red tape that is built in to those systems. So for example, when you go into a hospital and there's one or two doctors there and a handful of nurses and dozens of administrators there, not to mention the thousands of administrators that aren't there that are off-site at regulatory agencies and insurance agencies and all of these things. That is all built into the cost of your healthcare. Those thousands of people that are working to do nothing other than prove or enforce compliance with all of this bureaucracy. It's 3/4 of the cost is just that. You could, by just getting rid of all of that, you could knock down the cost of healthcare to 25% of what we're paying right now. That's before we get into patent protections for drugs that have been around for decades, things like insulin and epinephrine, things that cost pennies in other countries and cost hundreds or thousands of dollars here. That's before we get into certificate of need laws that allow large hospital systems and healthcare providers to not allow smaller competitors to compete in the areas that they're in, which reduces supply and increases the cost. Which in the best of times means higher costs and longer wait times. And during a pandemic, it means people dying. All of these are things that would not be happening if government wasn't imposing itself on the healthcare market.
Sure. So you see the government as the problem here rather than the solution.
Government is rarely the solution.
Sure. I suppose, so you talk about the regulation and whatnot. I think a lot of people might argue that, with such a high risk field that regulation might be necessary, right? Mm-hmm. Some sort of, I don't know whether it be, licensing or something along those lines. Like people, I think, want a sense of security in feeling that, somebody is watching over, making sure these people know what they're doing. You know what I mean?
We have to remember who it is that's doing the watching. So we are conditioned as children to believe that authority means expertise, right? We're told that if you're in trouble, you hug a tree or you go to a police officer, you wait for someone in authority to come because they know what's best for you. And we are taught that as little children, and then we go on to subconsciously simply believe that authority equals knowing what they're doing. Even though we know in the abstract that that's nonsense. We look at these politicians, they're idiots. Most of universally we recognize that all or most politicians have no business. We might like one or two politicians, but for the most part, if we look at politicians as just a general group, we tend to look at them disparagingly because we recognize that they often have no idea what they're talking about. They're handed talking points that they're basically actors who they give the talking points beautifully, but they often don't even know what they're talking about. They need a teleprompter at all times because they don't even know what they're saying. They're handed stuff by billionaire cronies and lobbyists to, this is what you tell people. And yet then we immediately turn around and go, but we need these people to be telling us how to live, to protect us. I would say that you are going to get far better standards from the actual experts in that field. Going back to what we were talking about with the testing. Healthcare workers, doctors, the medical professionals know the standards that they have to keep. They're the ones who set the standards that they have to keep. Mm-hmm. They had these tests ready. Apparently test kits are something that can be readily and easily made. And even if they had a slightly higher false negative or false positive rate, that would be exponentially better than not allowing any testing at all. Here is usually how regulations work. Crony lobbyists hand regulations in the form of legislation and their preferred regulations from regulatory agencies to politicians. Politicians go to their messaging teams who find the best way to present it to the people as a way to protect the public. Then they pass these regulations either through legislation or having the regulatory agencies adopt them. And then as soon as, and what those regulations do is they make it increasingly unaffordable for those big businesses, smaller competitors to be able to compete because they can't afford the cost of compliance. So they go out of business, leaving only the large companies to provide whatever that service is that's being regulated. when those companies inevitably break their own regulations, the first thing that government does is try to cover it up, if at all possible. Is there any way that we can try to not let people know that this happened? If that doesn't work, here's what they do. They give them a slap on the wrist fine. They indemnify them. They protect them against being sued by us, the victims of whatever damage they just did. Then they make us pay for the cost of any kind of cleanup, any kind of settlements, any kind of lawsuits, any kind of damage that's been done to people's lives. We, the victims, the taxpayers, the people who are victimized by this, that's what regulations do. They cut out small businesses and small providers. They entrench those cronies as the only people that are able to effectively be able to provide those services, which drives up costs and reduces the access to whatever that thing is. And then the very companies that are the most likely to do the most damage that those regulations were supposedly going to protect us from, they're the ones that get protected. They get protected against lawsuits. They get protected against the cost of doing whatever the cleanup or remediation of the damage, and they get a slap on the wrist fine. I say it would be far better, in most cases, to simply allow within those different fields the people to set their own standards and for us to be able to judge them on their excellence. There are very few restaurants who are able to stay in business by just doing the bare minimum, because we're all out there telling each other how good the restaurant is. Not just how clean the food is, or how clean the bathrooms are, or how nice, but how nice the atmosphere is, how good the food tastes. Things that can't even really be regulated.
Or quantified even.
Yeah, you can't even really quantify or qualify it. But we tell each other how well it goes. I think that, combined with allowing people in those sectors to be able to set their own standards, is going to be far more effective than having the very people that we're supposedly being protected from creating these regulations and destroying their smaller competitors.
Sure. Wow. So yeah, that was a lot. No, that's good.
No, it's going to be a lot.
That's fine.
My answers tend to be a lot.
No, that's great. I mean, I prefer that than you not really
Vacuous
knowing what to
statements.
say,
Yeah.
Or having something superficial. So I guess you have all these critiques of the government, and politicians especially. And you're now a politician. You're running for vice president of the United, or you ran for vice president of the United States.
I'm a retired VP.
Right.
Candidate, yes.
So with that being said, obviously you're involved, so what is your vision for this, and what, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, what's your vision for this, and what should the role of government be?
So those are two very big separate questions.
Sure.
I think I'll focus first on what I think the role of government should be.
Okay.
A government that has any claim to being a legitimate government that has the consent of the governed. That's the standard in this era by which we judge whether or not a government is just, whether it has the consent of the governed. In order to be able to claim that it has consent of the governed, there are some very key points that it must have to be able to claim that. Number one, it has to be voluntarily funded. If it is being funded through theft and through extortion, then it doesn't have consent. If my business model is to put a gun to your head and tell you have to give me as much money as I tell you that you owe me, then there's no consent there. You may be choosing to give me the money, but it's only because you don't want to get harmed if you do the opposite. So that's number one. The second thing is that at no point should it be infringing upon the lives, rights, or property of the people. And its only role should be protecting and affirming the lives, rights, and property of the people under its presumed jurisdiction. That really is the long and the short of what government should and should not be doing. It should be voluntary, and it should be acting only to protect lives, rights, and property. And anytime it goes outside of that, for even the best of intentions, often it's not for the best of intentions, but even if it's for the best of intentions,
sure,
by its very nature, a centrally planned monopoly that claims through violence and threats of violence sole jurisdiction over something is not a good organization to be providing a service. If you have one of two options in getting a service, you can get it from competing providers who have a vested interest in providing you the best value because they don't want to lose you to their competitor, or you can get it through someone who goes, this is what I'm going to give you, take it or leave it. Government is a monopoly who says take it or leave it, except they don't give you the option to leave it. You just have to take it. You're not going to get good services from that. You're not going to get the things that you want from that. The only thing that they could even conceivably do correctly is protect your life and your rights and your property and affirm the existence of that. And that's it. To your other question, what is my vision for this, for the Libertarian Party? It's less about me, and it's more about the party and the movement. My vision for me is to be whatever kind of vessel and vehicle I can be for the greater party in the movement. It's
Well,
about
I think
that.
what I meant by that question was like, what is your vision for what we should do if you were to have won the vice presidential
Okay.
seats, right? Or even, in office, what would you do?
So if we had won the election, here's what our focus would have been on. And it would have been on things that we can actually do, because the president isn't a dictator, or at least is not supposed to be a dictator, and they can't just create laws and things like that. Here is what we would have focused on. Unrolling all of the bad executive orders and regulations that have come from the executive office, which is a lot. Most of them. The vast majority of the stuff that has come out of the White House has been bad stuff. And
Since history, or just the last,
in general. I mean, in general, so really either way. You
Right.
could say historically or even recently, because there's been this sort of exponential bell curve increase of regulation. So if you look at the fact that, I think 80 or 90% of the regulations that are on the books came around in our lifetime.
Yeah.
So yes, to answer, so either way, historically and recently, the vast majority of it is bad. And when I say bad, it's not there to protect or affirm the lives, rights, and property of the people. It's there to tell us how to do something, or to impose a fee upon us, or to impose a tax upon us, or to limit us in some way that really is not in keeping with what government should or should not be doing. So we would get rid of all of that kind of stuff, and in doing so, the American people would see the immediate and profound benefits of being more free, of being more able to make choices for themselves, of not having all of these costs imposed upon them. The other thing we would have done is, so for example, ending the war on drugs by simply descheduling all the drugs. Getting the federal government out of it entirely. If individual states want to decide drug policy, great, but get the federal government out of that question. Ending the wars by declaring an end to them. Congress never declared a war, which they passed the authorization of use of military force, which says that the president can decide when the wars start and when they end, as long as it's related to terrorism. She would have just declared that they were all over and begun the process of bringing the troops home. It's obviously not an overnight thing. Pardoning anyone who is in prison or who has a conviction for a victimless crime, a crime that doesn't have an actual victim. So tax evasion, selling drugs, selling guns, things that every party involved in it was a willing party, and no one was being directly
consensual. Right?
Yeah, totally consensual. Should not have been against the law in the first place. Shouldn't have even been a law in the first place. And setting these people free and allowing them to be able to, and expunging their records so they can actually go on and thrive instead of being victimized by the war on drugs and the war on guns and the war on victimless crimes. These are the kind of things that we would have done immediately without even having to talk to Congress. The other thing that we would have done is worked with whatever allies we had in Congress and everyone else there to try to get meaningful legislation passed. And when the American people would have seen how their lives would have benefited from the things that we could have done on our end, and then for us to be able to say, hey, listen, look how much better things could be if we could get things done at the legislative level, we believe that that would have been a powerful negotiating tool, either with that Congress or whoever replaced them after the next election.
Well, let's see. You've gained a lot of popularity over the last few months or so, this last year with the election, and a lot of people I've seen have been calling for you to run for president now. Do you think that's going to happen?
First of all,
obviously it's really early.
I was going to say. So first of all, I should just say I've made no decisions for 2024, at all. Yes, no, anything like that. I have no, and it probably won't be at least another year or two before I even know personally, and I wouldn't be saying anything to anyone until at least a year and a half or two from now. But what I'm not going to do is leave people on the hook, leave people hanging. I'm going to let people know long before it would matter one way or another what I plan on doing. So I'm not going to leave people hanging, and I'm not doing the cliffhanger thing because I think it's useless. And if there are other people that they may want to support, if I'm not in the race, I'd rather step out if I'm not going to be in it, or step in if I am going to be in it. But we're nowhere near that right now. But here, the more important thing is this: we just got 1.2%. The highest that the Libertarian Party has ever gotten is 3.2%.
Sure.
I don't want to run for something that I don't even have a shot in hell of getting on the debate stage, much less winning the election, okay? So what's more important to me is the question of what needs to happen between now and 2024 so that whoever runs for president as a libertarian is able to get on that debate stage and is able to actually have a shot of winning, or at least doing very well, placing very well and helping, make a substantial growth in the direction and trajectory of the Libertarian Party. That's what my focus is on right now. Is on growing the party to a formidable force that's actually able to contend and win elections from the White House all the way down to city council and fire sheriff and everything in between. That's my focus for at least the next couple of years. If that lends itself to my running as the presidential nominee, then so be it. If it lends itself to someone who's better than me running as the presidential nominee in 2024, so be it. That, again, this is not about me. It's about the party and the movement.
Sure. So explain a bit, what's the deal with the debates and that controversy?
So the way it works, the debates used to be hosted by the League of Women Voters. And their criteria was pretty much if you were on enough state ballots to be able to conceivably win the Electoral College, then you could be on the debates. That allowed Ross Perot to be in the debates in 1992. Coming into that debate, he was seen largely as a joke. He was this kind of short, funny-talking man with this high-pitched voice. He was a quirky billionaire, had a lot of interesting colloquialisms that he'd say, but no one saw him as a serious contender. Then he got on the debates. And the American people, with all of the narrative gone, with all of the media, the punditry and opinion makers and all that stuff gone, and it was just three men on stage, Bill Clinton, George Bush, and Ross Perot, he won those debates overwhelmingly. The American people overwhelmingly looked at that debate and said the only person on there who looks like a viable person to be president is Ross Perot. He mopped the floor with them. As a result of that, he came out of those debates leading in the polls. He actually dropped out because he never actually wanted to win. He just wanted George Bush not to win because he had like this long-standing feud with George Bush. Right. That was the only reason he was running in the first place, was to make sure George Bush didn't win. So he actually dropped out for about a couple of weeks or a month or something like that, and then got back in because he didn't actually want to win. But if he had wanted to win, he would have won it. And it would have been because he was in that debate and the people saw that, wow, this is who we should have running. Historically, the American people, generally American voters, first start tuning in by and large to the election with the debates, which happens sometime in
September.
Late September, early October, typically. And then from there, that's really when the race truly begins for the larger general public. After that, the Democrats and the Republicans were horrified because the most important things that to the Republicans and Democrats is that Republicans and Democrats continue to win because they're all part of the same system. They're all part of the same crony billionaire gravy train that robs all of us of trillions of dollars a year to the benefit of a very small handful of incredibly powerful, wealthy people. Coming out of that, they basically created something called the Commission on Presidential Debates. They took it over from the League of Women Voters, and now they control the debates. The Democrats and the Republicans control the debates. And they've set a criteria of 15% in 5 or more reputable opinion polls. You have to get 15% or more to qualify for the debates. But then they don't actually require that the polling companies mention everyone in the polls. So Joe and I weren't mentioned in most of the polls. We didn't get regular mention in polls until like September or October. Well, by then, everyone was already paying attention just to Republicans and Democrats like they do in most cycles. We need to grow this party into such a movement that we can't be ignored, that we don't rely on the vain hope that Gallup and CNN and New York Times polling companies pay attention to us and include us in their polls, and hopefully we get 15%. So we need to grow out of that. We need to grow to a point where, of course, we qualify for the debates. Of course, we get 15%. Of course, we're in viable, contention to run because we've already built our grassroots and our base of support into something that can't be ignored.
And how do you do that?
We do that by going to the grassroots. We have to take our message directly to the people. That's why Joe and I did this bus tour thing, which was wildly successful. It was after our bus tour started that we saw a massive ramping up of new people joining the Libertarian Party and registering in their state as libertarians. The number of people that registered just since, I think, April, 30% increase in the number of members, and a similar increase in the number of people that registered as libertarians, the highest numbers we've ever had. So in that respect, we grew the grassroots more than we ever had before. I also saw firsthand that it's great to have a strong national organization. It's great to have a strong national strategy. It's the people at the grassroots that do the heavy lifting every day when it comes to push comes to shove in the campaigning, especially for the down ballot races, people running for citywide offices, county and statewide offices, people running for, Congress and things like that, the bottom of the ticket races. That's where the work is being done, is at the grassroots. We have to grow the grassroots. And that looks like many things. It looks like constant and continued social media outreach. It looks like finding good candidates who are running for local and regional offices and putting the resources into them for them to be able to win those races, so that they can start affecting policy at the local level, so that people in their local communities can see what libertarian governance looks like. It looks like a whole host of things, and it's something that has to be a year-round, perpetual thing that's happening, something that doesn't just get ramped up during the midterms and during the presidential election. And it's really just doing the work. It's about, we often, because we're such a small party and because we want to shoot for the moon, we're looking for that Hail Mary pass that's going to win it all for us. That could happen. It hasn't yet. The party's existed for 50 years now, and it hasn't happened yet. We have to do the hard work of growing the party at the grassroots level.
Sure. Speaking of that, where do you think that your campaign specifically went wrong or could have done better to be more successful in 2020?
The Jorgensen Cohen campaign? Yeah. I think my biggest single criticism is that we needed to have picked 2 or 3 things that were the hot button issues that people were talking about and laser focus our campaign on those things. If you look at the libertarians that did the best in the down ballot races, Ricky Harrington, Donald Rainwater, Brad Barron, as well as people like Kalish Morrow, Kara Schultz, and others who actually won their races in local races, they picked 2 or 3 major issues that were the hot button issues in the country or in their state or in their area, and they laser focused on those things. They became the candidate that had the best message for that. They still had an answer for everything else, but they were laser focused on that. We did that at times, and at times we were pitch perfect, but we often were presenting the entire libertarian platform.
Yeah,
and
I remember that.
Part of the problem with that is that, A, it doesn't give us that laser focus where people go, oh, they're the candidates of being against the lockdowns, or they're the candidates about ending the wars, or they're the candidates about, making healthcare affordable again. They go, oh, wow, they believe a whole lot of stuff. I'll have to look at that later. The other thing it does is it doesn't allow us to focus our resources, our money and our time on those specific things. So if I had been in charge of messaging, what I would have wanted to do is, let's focus on what people are most worried about right now. And it's all related to the pandemic. It's all related to COVID. The pandemic itself, the lockdowns, the school closures, the greater healthcare discussion that comes out of that and that we've already been having even before that. All of it was centered around that in 2020. Everything was centered around the pandemic. We needed to be the candidates that had the best answers for...
Sure.
I should say, we already had the best answers. We needed to focus on having those best answers. And then when
those.
I'm sorry?
And marketing those, like, specific...
And marketing those specifically. We did that, but then we did a lot of other stuff too,
Sure.
and it didn't allow us to laser focus on that. And then as a corollary, so for example, when the George Floyd murder happened and then the protests happened as a result of that, we needed to then laser focus on those issues and have the best answers for that. And then as soon as the conversation started meandering back to the pandemic and the lockdowns and everything, go right back to that. We needed to go where the conversation was. As libertarians, we often go, well, we don't want to talk about what the normies are talking about. We want to make it what we're talking about. You can do that if you have a Twitter following in the hundreds of millions. You can do that if you already have command and control of media or have 100% name recognition. If you don't, you have to go with the tide of opinion and get your ideas into the greater cultural conversation so that it goes downstream to the politics. That's what we should have been doing. Ultimately, that might have gotten us 3%. That might have gotten us 2.5%. That might have even gotten us 4%. Nothing was going to win us the election because we don't have the numbers yet to be able to do it. So I will say that for whatever failures we may have had, for whatever things we should have been able to do differently, for whatever things that I may not even recognize that we should have done differently, ultimately it is the difference between what single digit number we got.
So it sounds like it wasn't even your goal to win necessarily.
So it's a weird dichotomy because in my 20 plus years of business and now politics, I have never gone into anything with the goal of losing well or failing well. It's always been to win. I ran this race, and I believe Joe ran this race as well, to win. I was on a bus every single day, and when I wasn't on the bus, I was flying around the country. I was in sometimes 2 states a day campaigning. I was not running to get 5%. I was not running to get 3%. I certainly wasn't running to get 1.2%. I was running like you would run if you were trying to win a race.
It's just interesting that you say that, though, because like the feeling that I get from a lot of like libertarians online is or I should say that's a big argument against libertarianism. A lot of times, like, oh, they have no chance to win, right? And then the sort of comeback on that is, well, yeah, they'll win if you vote for them, right? Sort of thing like that. But I want to say that one thing that I noticed about that sort of spread strategy that you were talking about, or when you'd see a tweet thread from Joe or whoever saying like, oh, this is what we believe in for this, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
The other thing I noticed about that, you talked about 2 things, but the other thing I noticed is that a lot of times, there might be a list of 24 items or something like that, and then somebody will go down the list and they'll be like, and then all of a sudden they comment on the 8th one saying like, okay, well, I don't like this, so I'm going to vote for Joe Biden. I'm
going to vote for someone that I disagree with 98% of the time because I disagree with you on
I'm
this
saying
one.
that might be another criticism to that system.
It is not a good idea to do that during an election. That kind of messaging is good now. So like my social media is going to be focusing, yes, it's still going to focus on the things people are talking about, but we will devote time to just general libertarian advocacy and education on all sorts of stuff. Everything from drug policy to gun policy to tax policy, immigration policy, foreign policy, everything. And it's good to have that and to do that as a tool for activism and outreach and coalition building with other people who have similar beliefs in that sector, and also just education. There are a lot of people that don't know what they think about that, but especially during an election, when you are running to get as many votes as possible, hopefully enough to actually win the race, you have to do what people are the most concerned about, what they're voting based on.
Appeal to the masses.
You have to appeal to what people are talking about. So back to, I do want to finish answering your question about this dichotomy between run to win, but also we weren't going to be able to win.
Sure.
You have to run to win. If I show up at a campaign and I'm looking at a campaign event and I'm talking to people some people who have traveled hours to see me, they see us as the only hope for this country. They're dealing with people who are telling them they're wasting their time voting for us. I've got people that have put this event together, blood, sweat, and tears, and their own money just poured into this thing to try to bring. And I show up and I go, guys, I'm feeling good about 4%.
Right.
I have just demoralized everyone there. Even if we all recognize that the odds of us winning are slim to none, you go in there and talk about what we're going to do when Joe Jorgensen gets elected. You have to do it that way. And if someone says, what do you think your odds are? I go, hey, listen, historically our odds aren't good. And here are the things we need to do to make our odds better in the future. But in the meantime, here we are, and here's what we plan to do if we get elected.
That you didn't really talk about during the campaign? Like, I mean, it's December 1st right now, right? So, like, is this, one of the first times that you're sort of openly talking about this?
No, if I was asked during the campaign, if someone would say, what odds do you think you have? I'd say, listen, better if you vote for me. I would say that. I would say, listen, odds are great. If everyone votes for us, our odds are 100%. But But delving into it at the Q&A, because I at all of my events, almost all my events, I'd do like a 5-10 minute speech, but I'd spend at least a half hour on Q&A because I felt like that was so much more important, answering the questions of the people that were there. And a question I often got was, do you think we're going to win? Or what do you think the odds are that we're going to win? Or do you think we're going to get 5%? And if so, how do we go from 5% to like 35% that we need to actually win? Or give or take 35% to actually be able to win the Electoral College. And I'd say we have to run to win for all the reasons that I just stated. We know the odds that we face and the challenges that we face and the built-in hurdles that we face, having had to spend so much time just even getting on the ballot in the first place, dealing with the media completely blacking out on talking about us and all of that. But we have to run to win because we have to inspire people with a vision of why we're running in the first place. To show them that not only are we a third choice, but that we're the only viable option. Our policies and our way of looking at how government should be interacting with the people is the only way to fix the problems that we're facing. And that this election is far too important to continue voting for the same people who created the mess that we're in right now in the vain hope that they'll fix it. And that is the core of how we have to do it. But you can't shirk away from the reality of the odds. So no, when I was asked, I would say our odds are not, historically are not favorable, and we know why that is. But we have to keep moving forward, and in the meantime, in between
you're not
the elections,
giving up by any means.
We're not giving up, and I'm not going to lie to people or sugarcoat to people.
Sure.
Because sugarcoating is the best way for us to continue getting 1%.
Sure.
We have to look at this as what it was. We lost. We came in third. We came in third in all 50 states for the first time ever. We have solidified ourselves as the third largest political party and the fastest growing political party. These are all good things, but we have to recognize that this was a crushing loss in terms of the actual percentage of votes that we got, even with all the historical context and all of that. Stripping all that away, we got 1.2%. If we want to go from 1.2% to winning 270 Electoral College votes, we have to rapidly and massively grow the grassroots movement of the party.
So you're optimistic, but you're not naive about,
Yeah, yes.
Right.
Yes.
Well, it sounds good. This went a lot longer than I thought it would, but I'm good wrapped up here. Do you have anything you want to... Where can people find more about you and the Libertarian Party?
So the Libertarian Party, if you go to lp.org, that is the website for the Libertarian Party. I am on all social media. I'm on Facebook, I'm on YouTube, I am on Instagram, I am on TikTok for the kids. For the kids. I am on, I'm on everything, pretty much. I'm on Twitter.
Sounds good.
So if you want to find out more about libertarianism, you can go to lp.org and find out. My YouTube channel has a ton of videos about libertarianism. What do libertarians think about healthcare? What do libertarians think about XYZ, whatever policy? And then also, but what about this? So I have, I think, well over 200 videos on there, and we try to add at least 1 or 2 new videos every week. That's the best way to find out. There's a bunch of information on there. And if you're someone that is sick of arguing with people about libertarianism, I have a lot of people who have thanked me. They're like, I just link your videos now. When someone's like, yeah, but what about the roads? I just put the what about the roads video.
Gotcha.
Or if I get the, yeah, but what about mass shootings? I put that video up. So that's how you can find out more.
Gotcha. Well, I'll have all that linked in the description for you guys if you want to check that out. And yeah, thanks for chatting with me.
Thank you for having me.